Hello everyone, welcome to Best Recipes with Sharon. I'm excited to bring this delicious recipe to you today. It's for easy American-style beef pasties. There's many different versions of these around the world, but this is my version of it. So stay tuned and I'll show you how I make them. Before we get started, check out my new cookbook. It's available on Amazon, and I provided a quick link in the description below this video. If you click on that link, it'll take you straight to the Amazon page where you can purchase your own copy. And thanks so much in advance for my loyal supporters. Now back to today's featured recipe. So we'll start with a little prep and pre-pouring some of the ingredients. This will really help out when you go to put this together. You'll need half a cup of lard and half a cup of butter. Place that in the freezer to chill it so that it's really cold. We'll start by making some pastry that's going to be the crust for these pasties. Start with 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. You can start by putting it in the blender, or you can use the mixer. At this point I'm going to measure it all and put it in the blender just to show you what's all in it. Here I'm chopping the butter and the lard into smaller pieces. This has already been chilled, and little tip when making this pastry, it needs to be cold for most of the time while you're working with it. Now add 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. And like I said, you can use your blender to mix this if you want, but I much prefer my mixer, so I'm going to switch this over to my KitchenAid and use the hook attachment. Yeah, that's much better. I certainly like my mixer, and I think that's my favorite kitchen tool. Gotta be. It's got enough power to mix things quickly, and you want it to come to the point where it's crumbly like this. So mix it until you get this texture. Okay, so here I'm adding 1/3 cup of cold buttermilk. Then mix that until the dough clings together. There, it's starting to cling together a little bit better. So I'm going to stop the mixer and add a little bit of ice cold water. And the dough looks like it doesn't need any more moisture. I'll add about 1/4 cup of ice cold water. This will chill it down a little bit. Only mix it just a little bit more, and it will be a bit mucky at this point. So I will stop the mixer once again and add a little bit of flour and then shape the dough, but don't overmix at this point. And this is where I use my hands to do this part. I feel like it gives you a little bit better control of the dough, and you don't want to overmix like I said, so just get it out there onto a floured surface and shape it into a little bit of a flat disc. And get ready to place it in a plastic bag and refrigerate it for at least an hour. Now on to making the delicious filling that goes inside this pastry. I choose a high quality grade of beef. This one's a top sirloin, and if there's any fatty pieces, I cut it off and discard it. Then take a sharp knife, slice the beef, and chop it into little small cubes. And these are about 1/2 inch in size. Now the amount that you're going to need is roughly 12 ounces. Now I do have a scale, so I can measure that, but for those of you who don't have a scale, it's roughly 2 cups. If you're using a scale, be sure to weigh the bowl and then decrease that amount off of the weight so that you know exactly how much beef you've got. Now on to prepping the potatoes. When you're choosing the potato for this recipe, it's good to have a nice firm potato with a waxy outside. It will hold up nice in this recipe. So we're going to wash and dice the potatoes in, again, about 1/2 inch size. Then measure your cubed potatoes, and it should be about 1.5 cups. prepare a couple of nice sized carrots. You'll need about 3/4 of a cup of diced carrots. And you might want to cut these just a little bit smaller than the potatoes and the meat. Be sure and have all this prep done ahead of time so that when you go to put this together, it just comes together really nicely and you will not be burning anything because you'll be adding it one after the other. So now you use a large pot, place it on medium-high heat and add 1 tablespoon of butter. When that starts to melt, you can add your cubed beef. You cook that and stir it back and forth until the beef is lightly browned. And this will probably take maybe 10 minutes or so. And you can see that the meat is forming its own juices here as well. So as it cooks, you're actually creating great flavor for your gravy. Now then add 3/4 of a cup of diced carrots that you've prepared ahead of time. And go ahead and add the 1.5 cups of diced potatoes as well. Now add enough water to just barely cover these. So it's a guesstimation as to how much water you'll need, so it'll be just enough to barely cover, which could be a couple of cups or so. Give it a good stir and continue to simmer it over a medium-high heat. Be careful not to overcook these. You want them to still be a little crisp when you go to put them into the pasties. Now go ahead and add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Add a generous 1/2 teaspoon of rosemary leaves. And a generous 1/4 teaspoon of oregano. And also a good 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. Bring this up to a boil and let it simmer for about 7 minutes. Your meat should be cooked through and your potatoes and carrots should be just slightly softened but a little bit firm. Remove it from the heat and strain the liquid off of it and save the liquid because you're going to be needing this for your gravy. You'll need a good cup of it. Now then coarsely shred a 1/2 cup of sweet onion. Melt 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter in a medium-sized frying pan. Add the shredded onions to the butter and continue to fry it, giving it a good stir, and continue to fry it until the onion becomes soft and a little bit translucent, and it will start to brown a little bit. And once you notice that it is starting to brown up a little bit, add 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour and stir that in until it makes a paste. Continue to fry it until the floured onions start to brown a little bit. Then add your liquid that you've drained off of your beef and vegetables. And continue to stir it until it's all mixed in together and it starts to thicken up nicely. Then you take this and add it to your vegetables and your meat. And continue to stir it until they're all evenly coated. Then set it aside until we're ready to use it. Let's prepare a little bit of an egg wash. We'll use this to brush on the top of our pasties. Crack a large egg into a small bowl. Add a tablespoon of milk and mix that together and set it aside till we're ready to use it. It's as simple as that. Now remove your pastry from the fridge, cut it in half, and shape your dough into a round shape so that it's easier to roll it out. You will need to use a little bit of flour, but use it sparingly. I also use parchment paper because I find that is a trick that really helps to keep it together and it doesn't stick to the surfaces badly, so it's easier to work with. So secure it to the counter with a little bit of parchment paper that's a little long, and you press your body against it to anchor it and then roll it out. It's easier that way. Not only does the dough not stick to the counter, but it also doesn't stick to your rolling pin. Parchment paper also allows you to use less flour. And ultimately, a flaky pastry. Any pieces of dough that you're not using and working on, you need to keep it in the fridge or the freezer. Now you can make these any size that you want them to be. And I'm using a bowl so that I can cut around it and make it a perfect round shape. This bowl is probably about 6 inches across. Now, before placing the filling in your dough, pick up your dough to make sure it's not stuck to your work surface. And your dough should be about 3/8 of an inch thick. Place your filling in the middle of the dough and don't overfill them because it'll be difficult to close them. I left a good inch all the way around so that it would be easy to crimp the edges. To work quickly so that your dough doesn't warm up too fast and it's harder to work with. And be sure to preheat your oven to 400 degrees so that it will be ready when you're ready to bake these. Cut the parchment paper around each of them, and then I place 3 holes in the top so that it's like a steam outlet for them. And you can pick each of them up just by the edge of the parchment paper and place them on the cookie sheet so that they're ready for baking. Now I had rolled out the rest of the dough and then put it in the freezer, so this is a little bit stiff, but that's okay, it warms up extremely quick. So I'll roll this out till it's the right size, I'll flour it, make sure that it's a little bit thinner than it is. And once again, continuing to work quickly while the dough is still cold. Here you can see that if the dough is a little bit thin, some of the filling will poke through. You can easily patch it up with just a piece of dough like this. Now, before placing them in the oven, you paint the tops of them with the egg wash. Then you'll bake them in the 400-degree oven for between 15 and 20 minutes. So with the last bit of dough and filling, I'll make one large one. And this almost looks a little bit more like a panzerotti than a pasty. And if you have the patience to make smaller ones, you can just do bite-sized ones if you want to, but you'll have to adjust the time for baking. So if they're smaller ones, it would take less time, and of course this larger one may take a little bit longer. No matter what size you make them to be, they'll be equally as delicious. And don't forget to put the egg wash on before you bake each of them, and they should turn out nice and golden brown. Alright, so check these out. Look at this, perfectly cooked. So now the first pan is done. I'll put the next pan in the oven and finish baking that one. So what I've got here is I've got about 5 that are individual serving size and then 1 large one. So you know, this would make enough for maybe about 4 or 5 people depending on how hungry you are. So there you have it, perfectly baked, nice and golden brown. Now we're going to go and cut it open and you can see how flaky the crust is and how delicious the filling looks. The pastry is nice and flaky and the inside is not too runny but still nice and moist. The carrots and potatoes held together nicely and they're still just a tiny bit crisp, which is perfect because you don't want them to turn soft and mushy. So there you have it. That's my version of pasties. This one is extremely delicious. you've got to try it. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and give a comment in the comment section. And thanks so much for your subscribing. And until next time, happy eating.